Welcome to another episode of Managing the Problems of Daily Living. We're delighted today to feature Hillary Circus, MS, to talk to us about relaxation and grounding techniques. Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you.
Please tell me first why you think that this is an important subject.
Well, I think this is very important because we all experience different stressors and anxiety, and for a lot of people, trauma. And it can be really helpful to learn relaxation and grounding techniques to help us in those moments when we are feeling those difficult, uncomfortable feelings and thoughts, that we're able to utilize these techniques.
That's great information. I think that I typically refer people to more generalized relaxation techniques for anxiety, but I like the idea that you're talking about not only trauma concerns, but also, you said earlier, anger management.
Mm-hmm. It can help with a variety of, again, like uncomfortable, unhelpful emotions. So that includes, any kind of emotion, but especially anxiety, stress, and anger can be really helpful.
And people can be triggered. And I think in another episode on anger management, you talked about what those kinds of triggers could be. So when you feel your anger, your stress, your anxiety sort of building, I like to have people measure it on a scale from 0 to 100. You can do, 0 to 10. So as you're moving from that so-called normal level of 3 to 4 or 30 to 40 upwards, what can we do to sort of bring that down? So the symptom list includes, for anxiety, shakiness, dizziness, rapid heart rate, right? Increased respiration.
Right. And what happens is when we are experiencing that perceived danger, so whether that's physical threats or emotional, so again, those thoughts, feelings, when they come up, our body it activates what's called the sympathetic nervous system, and it activates that, some people might know, the fight or flight response. What happens when we perceive these kinds of danger, again, perceived danger. So what happens is exactly what you're talking about. It has those not only psychological effects, but the physiological effects as well, including sweaty palms, rapid heart rate, increased breathing, our muscles tense.
Okay, so let's talk about the first technique on your list, and that is breathing techniques.
Mm-hmm. So breathing is so important because we all have access to our breath. I know people breathe about 6,000 breaths a day. So, and how many of those are we really mindful about? So we always have access to our breath. So it's versatile. It's easily attainable. We always have access to it no matter where we are, and it's very discreet as well. So with breathing, of course, it's great in general. It helps reduce our heightened levels of heart rate, as well as other physiological effects from that. But I like to do with my patients is really what's called diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing. So if you have one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach, and we take deep breaths in through our nose and exhale through our mouth. What's really helpful is if we feel our belly rising when we inhale. And what that's doing is it's allowing more oxygen into our lungs. So it's just a faster way of really calming ourselves down.
Right. And it's, as you said, straightforward, and it's always available to us. Okay. So that was one technique. And then you also talked about imagery, progressive muscle relaxation, and butterfly taps. So please tell us about imagery.
So imagery is when it's really helpful when we're at that heightened level to really imagine like a calming, peaceful setting. So for a lot of people, that might be at the beach. Let's just use that as an example. And we can literally visualize ourselves, either if we're sitting or standing or lying down, visualizing, how it feels, how the sand feels in your toes, and how the breeze feels against your skin or in your hair, or the sunlight, how that can be really helpful in terms of just relaxing and a calming technique.
Okay. And what about deep muscle relaxation? I like to do that with my clients as well.
Yes. So that's another one too, because as we mentioned before, when we experience stress, anxiety, all those different types of emotions, feelings, thoughts, that our bodies become tense. That's another physical symptom, as our muscles tense up.
Mm-hmm.
So when we practice progressive muscle relaxation, it helps us learn how to not only cope with when that happens, but be able to identify when that happens.
So if I'm feeling, I mean, oftentimes when I'm doing these techniques with my clients, you roll your head and neck around and you realize, oh, I'm carrying a lot of stress up there, or, different muscle aches, or as you said, headaches or dizziness. So, if I can countermand that bodily tension with these techniques, it's going to bring about an overall level of relaxation. And it's also another strategy that I can pull out
Mm-hmm.
when I need to.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. And what are butterfly taps?
Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that, again, a relaxation technique. It's also with breathing. So you take your hands like this and you interlace your thumbs like this, and you can put them on your chest here. For some people, it's more comfortable to do it like this, on their like shoulders. And so we can do it like this, or you can show with the butterfly in your chest, and I'll do it this way. And as we take slow, deep breaths, inhale, and we tap ourselves at a rhythm that's comfortable for us. And as we're taking inhale, we're breathing in and out. And we can do this for as long as we need to really feel relaxed.
I was watching one of my reality shows, and they had an expert on for anger management to show one of these individuals how to calm themselves down. So, what is that process? So, is it just distraction, or it's also actually affecting your physiology?
Absolutely. It's both. It's both. So, it's at that same time, it's that healthy form of distraction, as well as those physiological changes in your body. It's the same thing with all the things that we were just talking about in terms of breathing. And that is, again, a healthy form of distraction, as well as that more oxygen getting into your lungs that creates that physical response.
And it's also giving ourselves the opportunity to hit the pause button, right?
Yes.
So you're clearing your mind, obviously dialing down the anxiety, which is affecting the physiological response, but also in terms of our negative cognitions, our dysfunctional thoughts, you're giving yourself the opportunity to pause and have a window maybe to reframe in those moments.
Absolutely.
Or to inject positive, adaptive thoughts, right?
Right.
I am good enough. This will pass. This is just anxiety. I can manage this. Right?
Right.
Okay, excellent. All right. We hear a lot about grounding techniques. And I love, again, that you're talking about all of these things to include anger management and trauma, right? Because we all have kind of things that come up in our lives that might frighten us or cause us anxiety. We might not always even be aware that it's happening. So, when and how do we use grounding techniques? What are they, and when do we use them?
So, grounding techniques, similar to relaxation techniques, can be really helpful with all the things that we were talking about, difficult, uncomfortable emotions. Really, grounding is most helpful for anxiety or for PTSD, people who have experienced different trauma and who are experiencing what's called trauma reminders. So, whether that's, things like come up for them, like if they have a difficult memory, or maybe a certain smell reminds them of the trauma they've been through. It can be really helpful, again, as a way of healthy form of distraction from what's happening in our minds. And it can really help us be in the here and now moment.
Oh, I love that. So we're sort of, again, in the distraction, you're able to creating that window, you're able to bring yourself back to the here and now. I love that idea. I use that also with my clients. So instead of letting our minds sort of spiral, run, we allow ourselves the opportunity to stop.
Right.
Okay, we're going to talk more about grounding techniques and relaxation with Hillary Circus, MS, when we return, and we will be back.
If you love them enough to relearn math so you can teach them math, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Welcome back to Managing the Problems of Daily Living. We have a special episode today with Hillary Circus, MS. We are discussing relaxation and grounding techniques. It's a great review for me, but I also think it's kind of a quick and dirty primer for not only our clients, but for everyone. Everyone experiences anxiety. Wouldn't you agree?
Everybody, stress, everyone deals with their own types of trauma. It can be what's called like little trauma versus bigger types of trauma. So this can be utilized for everyone.
Correct. Okay, so we were in the middle of talking about grounding techniques, and I did want to say, in terms of my research, and we had Justin Bieber's therapist on a year or two ago, but he, on the YouTube documentary for Justin, was trying to sort of share with him some of these where you saw him tapping and here. So tell us sort of what the explanation is for those techniques and how does it work?
Yeah, so that's very similar to what we were doing before with the butterfly taps. And that's really, again, just grounding. Really grounding us. I know it's very simplified, but it's grounding us and feeling like, when we experience those different types of reminders of our trauma, or we're experiencing maladaptive or unhelpful thoughts, irrational oftentimes, or self-defeating thoughts, it can really help us in addition to learning and utilizing different skills like to challenge those thoughts. I'm cognitive behavioral oriented, mm-hmm. So that's what I do a lot with my patients, and learn to challenge the thought. In addition to that, being able to relax and be able to, again, in a healthy way, distract yourself from those unhelpful thoughts.
So in terms of this young man, he is an international superstar. His parents, I think, have each been married. I'm not his therapist, so I hope I'm not disclosing anything that's not in the popular press, but there's a lot of tumult. I can't imagine the kind of scrutiny he's under. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that there was some of that so-called performance pressure and performance anxiety. Mm-hmm. So the therapist recommended, I think he was more of a consultant, but he came in and recommended these techniques to sort of jumpstart him, get him through his day, allow him to be in that creative space and not to spend the time obsessing about probably what he couldn't do, right?
Right. And there's a lot of ways that I like to do that in my own practice. What's really helpful, there's a few different ones that I like to use, but one of them being it's called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. Mm-hmm. So what that does is it goes through, each number is designated for one of our senses. So when your mind's starting to really run in terms of experiencing those uncomfortable, unhelpful emotions, mm-hmm. we can learn to utilize this technique. So you find 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can feel, and 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So for example, if you're sitting outside in your backyard, noticing how, the sensations of the wind, same thing with, we were talking about with imagery, noticing something new that you've never noticed before, or how the birds chirping sounds, and things like that. How, when the taste, that could be very hard for people, but maybe you can still taste your lunch from earlier, or the mouthwash that you used in the morning. And so these techniques are most helpful when we take our time, and we want this to take a while, several minutes. And that can really, again, distract us and help us calm down, both psychologically and physiologically.
Is this, Hillary, a technique that becomes easier, more reflexive if and when we practice?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it can be very hard for people when you're in a setting where you've seen several times, if not every day in your life. So when that happens, that's a great thing, because then you're more mindful of maybe the things or the sounds or what we hear, see, taste, whatever, that we've never thought before. We've never identified.
And we're actually formalizing these techniques, and I don't want them to sound intimidating for people. I had a guest on my show, as well in the last year or two, that talked about just taking your morning coffee and holding the cup, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you feel the heat of the cup of coffee, you smell it, you taste it. So you're really bringing in kind of all of that and dialing down your anxiety and putting yourself in that sort of clearer space for the day to begin. Was a little boy featured on the Today Show, adorable. The mother must have posted it somehow, where he sits down in the morning, 6 years old. He gets up before his siblings. He reads his chapter book, and he drinks his. Parents were clear to say not tea, but it's like water with honey and lemon. And everybody on the panel was saying, that's something that we all need to do, just to create that. It's not an empty space or it's probably like a free space, right? You're clearing your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And that allows your mind to really concentrate on something else that's more helpful than ruminating, like thinking about over and over again about the things that are causing that stress or that anxiety or that anger.
And I do believe, speaking from personal experience in my own evolution and something that I try to share with my clients as well, is that the more we practice it, I used the word reflexive before. If our triggers are, I'm going to, like that reptilian brain, jump at someone, if I'm late, if I'm in a long line, if someone cuts me off in traffic. So if I practice this stuff with these techniques with some frequency, I can call on that energy. I've done it before. It feels familiar. Oh, yeah, I'm waiting in the dentist chair. I can do my breathing. I can do my imagery.
I like to think about it as like a mental toolbox. So learning these skills, you put in your mental toolbox. So when you need to pull certain exercises or certain skills, like we're talking about, in certain moments, and maybe they're more helpful in one moment than they are in the other, and vice versa. And like one exercise we haven't talked about is like mental exercises can be really helpful. So something that is really helpful for a lot of people is something called like categories. And I know someone who has fear of flying, for example. So to help them calm down as they were on the plane, they love geography. So they utilized naming every state in the United States in alphabetical order. And that took, a while. And then you can start naming the different countries, or whatever you like, whether it's movies or music, you can utilize whatever category is helpful for you that you can connect with and you enjoy. So that's another form of distraction.
So, right. Claire Weeks is an author and an agoraphobic, her own label. I think from Great Britain, but she talks about, in terms of talking back, to say, it's just panic. It's anxiety. I've managed this before. Anger. This is my childhood bubbling up. So, again, like you're saying, Hillary, the more kind of options that we have, as a professor of mine would say, the kitchen sink approach, a menu of choices, you give people what's going to work for them, what becomes their favorite techniques.
Yes.
You did mention earlier, in terms of mindfulness exercises, leaves on a stream, clouds floating by, a body scan. That's new to me, Hillary. What is that?
So that mindfulness is, of course, just, in general, again, we've been talking a lot about being in the present moment. And what mindfulness exercises do is when these uncomfortable, unhelpful thoughts come up, we don't judge them, but we notice them. And then exercises like leaves on a stream or like clouds in the sky, we can visualize our negative, unhelpful thought going onto a leaf on the lazy river stream or on a cloud floating by. So we notice it, we put it on the cloud or the leaf, and we watch it float by, again, without judgment. So we're not ignoring, we're not pushing these thoughts away or down. we're acknowledging them, and we're doing that with ease after practice.
So the leaves on a stream floating by are those negative thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. I think in terms of getting closure for today, and I appreciate all the techniques that you brought to us,
Mm-hmm.
is that practice is important, right?
Mm-hmm.
As they say on the Peloton, practice makes progress. That we can't expect for some of us these techniques to happen immediately. I think that there's a learning curve, if you will.
Yes.
It can feel awkward, but there's tons of behavioral outcome literature that support its use, right, in a variety of areas.
Yes. And it's important to find what works best for you. I mean, we talked about that mental toolbox. So some of these things that you might learn in therapy aren't going to be very useful to you if it doesn't resonate with you. So finding what works best for you and practicing the things that work well.
That's really true. I can tell you, as a young student, I learned some of these techniques for probably the breathing and deep muscle relaxation for test anxiety. And I had anxiety about doing the techniques. And once I worked through that and stopped giggling,
Mm-hmm.
I thought, wow, this stuff really works. And all of these years later, I can do that kind of ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going somewhere where I know I'm going to be kind of stressed or in the moment. But I think the key is to practice when you're not in the moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. And something you just said about it being uncomfortable and silly, that's going to happen. And it might feel that way at first, but again, the more you practice, the easier it will get and the less silly you'll feel.
And correct. And they're using it now in corporations and schools. So I think it's and supported by the literature. So we want to thank you, Hillary Circus, MS, for reviewing relaxation and grounding techniques. And I imagine you're going to give a lot of people an opportunity to move forward with these techniques. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.